Good afternoon, everyone here in the room. Welcome to those joining us online. Good day, good morning, good evening from wherever you are. It is a pleasure to welcome you to this side event of the 51st session of the Human Rights Council, Strike It While It's Hot, Protecting and Advancing Human Rights Online. This event is organized by the Geneva Human Rights Platform, Access Now, the Swiss Federal Department of Foreign Affairs, and Costa Rica. My name is Felix Tiefmeyer. I'm your moderator for the next hour and a half. Let me just announce from the start that this is a public event, so the event is being recorded and will also be webcast. We will put online later for those who were not able to join us, because obviously we are in the end of a busy Human Rights Council session. So not everybody who wanted to join us today was able to do so. There will be communication and also photographs of the event. You should let us know if you do not want to be photographs for those in the room. For those online, never mind, it's a webinar. We don't see your faces at the moment anyway. So this just as information up front. Before presenting the panel, I would like to give the floor to Ambassador Nathalie Marti, Vice Director of the Directorate of International Law at the Federal Department of Foreign Affairs of Switzerland, for her opening remarks. Ambassador, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Excellencies, distinguished members of the panel, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Mr. Kirchmeier, for your introduction, and thank you to the team of the Geneva Academy for the valuable support in the organization of this side event. Thank you also to everyone in the audience for having taken time to join us virtually or in person here in Geneva during, as it was said, this busy period, the Human Rights Council. On behalf of Switzerland, Costa Rica, Access Now, and the Geneva Human Rights Platform, I warmly welcome you to this side event on the protection and advancement of human rights online. The topic of this side event is becoming increasingly important. On the one hand, the number of people worldwide who are active online is continuously rising. Additionally, we are observing a rapid technological development, as well as a great willingness from various stakeholders to use these new technologies. This issue of secure and unrestricted access to the internet is therefore gaining in significance. On the other hand, the COVID-19 crisis has laid bare the deep digital inequities across the globe. This made the current disparities in connectivity, digital security, privacy, and freedom of expression impossible to ignore. The looming energy crisis bears the risk that these inequities may further increase. Along with these developments, the question arises of how the respect and the protection of human rights online can be improved. In the last 10 years, the principle that human rights apply equally online and offline has been established in several resolutions, including by the Human Rights Council. While this is a very important first step in the right direction, humanitarian actors, development agencies, and private sector businesses seek more guidance to navigate the digital transformation. For instance, the question increasingly arises as to what this equal application of human rights online and offline means with regard to specific human rights on the one side and specific technological applications on the other side. In this regard, governments have already made important strides to advance human rights in the digital age. For example, they've made strategic efforts and provided tailored recommendations around the safety of journalists, the protection of the right to freedom of expression and opinion, and the promotion of the right to privacy. But yet we continue to witness the devastating impacts that spyware, internet shutdowns, or cyber security incidents have on human rights defenders, journalists, politicians, and activists across the globe. Moreover, communication platforms and search engines such as Google, Facebook, YouTube, or Twitter have become an integral part of our daily lives. This means that they also exercise a decisive influence on public debate. However, there are not yet any transparent regulatory mechanisms that could, for example, establish accountability for disinformation, hate speech, or violation of the right to freedom of expression. In this context, it is more essential than ever that United Nations human rights mechanism work towards filling gaps in both normative understanding, legal guidance, and concrete practice. In other words, the engagement of all of us is needed, so as to ensure that the resolution and initiatives within the Human Rights Council and other UN human rights mechanisms are fit for purpose in our digital age. In this context, one may wonder how existing shortcomings can be addressed. For instance, the question arises whether there is a need to include new language in Human Rights Council resolutions in order to better protect human rights online. The aim of this side event is to discuss exactly these types of questions so that we hopefully leave the room or log off with a clear idea of what action is needed to strengthen the international affirmation and protection of human rights in the digital age. My country, Switzerland, has a vision of a free, open, and secure digital space and works to reduce the associated risks and threats. Within our engagement for democracy and the respect for international law, including through our digital foreign policy, we always try to set our focus on people's needs. For example, the concept of digital self-determination is a priority of the Swiss digital foreign policy. With this concept, Switzerland envisions individuals not as passive users, but rather as proactive citizens and co-creators of their digital environment. Individuals should be able and enabled to determine what actions they take in the digital ecosystem. We are convinced that the rule of law, and notably human rights, must also be guaranteed online. This is true for human rights, such as freedom of expression and opinion, freedom of peaceful assembly, freedom of information, or the right to privacy. With Geneva being the world's capital for human rights diplomacy, and at the same time a hub for global digital and technology policy, we are very happy that today we all gathered here to discuss areas of progress as well as critical gaps in the protection of human rights online. It's a real pleasure to have you here, and on behalf of the Swiss Federal Department of Foreign Affairs, I wish you an interesting, engaging, and fruitful discussion. And now I give the floor back to Mr. Kirchmeier. Thanks a lot for your attention.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Sorry, I'm just moving the microphone so that people online can also hear us well throughout the debate. Thank you very much, Ambassador, for your opening remarks. The panel that will follow now will discuss areas of progress and as well as critical gaps in the international affirmation and protection of human rights in the digital age. As mentioned by the Ambassador, this year, the Human Rights Council celebrates a decade of work defining digital rights and applying the human rights framework to the online sphere. But as humanitarian actors, development agencies, private sector, and business seek guidance in navigating digital transformation, how can the Human Rights Council further fill gaps, both as mentioned again by the Ambassador, in normative understanding, in legal guidance, but also in concrete practice? So I'm delighted to have with me an excellent panel to explore those questions. We have Professor Ahmed Shaid, former UN Special Rapporteur on freedom of religion, belief, or still actually, but in transition, no, it's former already, sorry. But still, of course, professor at the University of Essex, where he's deputy director of the Essex Human Rights Center. And we have been working, of course, also with Essex University a lot in the very well-known project on human rights, big data, and technology. But not so much to talk about this. We'll talk more about the UN today. Next to him, actually, we have Professor Anna Beduski, so Professor of Law at the University of Exeter, and every now and again, Associate Researcher here at the Geneva Academy, what we're very happy about. We go by alphabetic order of the speakers, actually. So then also we have Khalida Ibrahim, Executive Director of the Gulf Center for Human Rights, also to add a regional perspective, working very much on issues linked, of course, including to digitalization. And Laura O'Brien, Senior UN Advocacy Officer at Access Now, partnering, of course, with us in this event and also instrumental in bringing the event together. Thank you very much, Laura, to you and your colleagues for that. And we'll hear from you the experience from Access Now, including the current research project that you're undertaking. Now we want to discuss identifying, as I said, areas of progress as well as critical gaps. We want to discuss new solutions in the pursuit of an open and secure digital space based on international law, the rule of law you mentioned, and human rights, and also see what leverage we might have in bringing academic findings such as your study. Well, academic in the good sense. Sometimes if people in the council say academic, they mean, kind of, far-fetched. If I say academic, I mean it's really something very spot on and honorable and something to take on in politics. So how actually to take those findings on with relevant stakeholders at the international level, national level, also at local levels. We'll have a starting round here with every one of the panelists speaking for some 5 to 7 minutes and an additional statement. But then we want to open the floor to your questions here in the room, but also online. For those online, it's a webinar setting. You cannot directly take the floor, but please do send your questions via the chat. So I have 2 colleagues with me here, Stefania and Domenico, who are taking note of your questions and who will bring them back to the panel then in the ensuing discussion. So don't be shy and send in your questions. If for any reason you prefer also to speak, there is a possibility to also technically then give you the floor later. But with this, let me turn to the panel. And first of all, Ahmed, to you, actually. I think your work as Special Rapporteur on freedom of religion has highlighted also areas linked with the digitalization and the digital space. There is the tension of freedom of belief, hate speech, defamation. What did you do within the focus of your mandate, but also in a broader sense during that tenure and also your work? What did you see the UN develop in that context? So with this, please, Ahmed, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. First of all, thanks for inviting me to this discussion, a very important discussion as we framed it. Striking the eye was hot, so it's a very good moment to do this. But let me preface my remarks on this by, first of all, asserting that any comment I make about the impact of technology on human rights, I want to preface by saying that the immense positive potential of technologies that we must harvest and we are harvesting. So in my mandate area, the big message is the potential that technology opens for the expansion of the space freedom of thought, conscience, and belief, through community building and through expression and so on and so forth. But quickly add the negative aspects of this, which we have to be very careful about. So all my reports do touch upon aspects of technology, how that impacts on protection of freedom of belief. But of course, the concerns are all negative in terms of how that has impacted on that enjoyment of the right. And most reports talk about the online space in terms of how hate speech has become multiplied through the online platforms, because the internet has become the premier global public arena. And because of that, the amount of engagement on that and how we take offline prejudices in a more amplified form on the online space, it therefore impacts upon everyone's access to the space as well. Because the idea of hate speech really is to eliminate people from the discussion, to push people out of the space, right? Whether it is a room or in other physical space. The idea of hatred is to silence somebody and then to get that person out, to exclude them from society and so forth. So something I look at is how those in a vulnerable situation are more adversely affected because of hate speech and how states and others can respond to that. So the hate speech dimension goes through all my reporting, including my very last one on indigenous people's rights, where of course some communities reported that they were facing, say, 90% respondents said that they faced weekly hate speech on online platforms. This is actually in democracies that we are talking about this. And then, of course, we have the more blatant forms of incitement to violence, often sponsored by governments or either ignored by governments or sponsored by governments, which then, the online platforms become very toxic forum for this to happen. And then there are cases of what I call digital authoritarianism, where governments use very poorly crafted laws offline, laws that haven't been up to speed perhaps for 50, 60 years, or even if they have been brought up to speed, not applied in practice. How that is used to coerce companies, force companies to reveal data about people they want to target. Therefore, almost opening a backdoor, physical backdoor, as it were, to various encryption methods used by people to communicate between them. So therefore, really targeting, being able to target those individuals and those groups, state has some reason to not like. Then we also have cases of states not knowing really what to do in case of incitement. Shutdowns are not uncommon here. Sometimes they come from perhaps a good place because they want to stop the incitement, but then they forget that through doing that, they actually cause more harm, perhaps, to those who are targeted, because the online communication space also enables them for communication with their own team and to know what's going on, be prepared for this. So it's like taking a very broad brush to deal with a smaller problem, resulting in much wider challenges. And then, of course, the big issue of all this is what do we do? I mean, there are, of course, shared obligations, and they can often be beefed up by strengthening the offline protections and then taking them online, like online rule of law. There's a huge role to play by tech companies. And of course, all my reports which look at this issue, first of all, insist that tech companies enforce their own community regulations, standards that they have said they will enforce. That will take out a lot of the issues that are already there. The second is, the whole problem about the digital space is that we don't know when our rights are violated. Likewise, we don't even know when our rights have been respected. For example, we recognize in the guiding principles the need to have due diligence, but also to remediate violations. And tech companies do promise, action against hate speech on their platforms. But how do we know what they're doing when we say flag a concern or report a case? So that transparency is so vital, and that's so lacking in many cases. And then, of course, being prepared to do that, being prepared to deal with hate speech in different contexts, again, takes a lot of investment. I want to flag two other reports I did a little bit more on this subject. One is my report on expression, where I speak about how even facial recognition technology was being used still by states to target individuals, and therefore essentially through chilling effects, shut down space for assembly, either physically by taking people in and questioning them and punishing them, or by people knowing that they can't go there because they're spotted, meaning that they therefore restrict that right. The other was a full report on freedom of thought, where of course we all safely assume, but we all assume, not safely perhaps, we assume that the freedom of thought is inviolable. It has the protection as with opinion. But we find that technology enables or presumes to enable governments to infer our thoughts, and through that punish us for thoughts we may have or not having them. So we get punished for our thoughts, we get coerced to revealing our thoughts, things like by undermining our privacy, going through our internet search history, going through other things that we have done. All of that can reveal our preferences, our choices, our things we perhaps believe or read about, and so on. And through that, make inferences about our life stances, and through that undermine our freedom of thought. And the recent report by the High Commissioner also flags this: the dangers of the problems posed by emerging forms of neurotechnology, some of which still in a very preparatory state, but they claim we're able to tell people what we're thinking. In other words, not just manipulate our thoughts and alter our thoughts, but pretend to claim to know what we think. And in my report, I cited a case from an Indian courtroom. The judge determined that there was mens rea because the graphing showed that the person was thinking, or the part of the brain that does this particular operation was alight at that time. And therefore, he had mens rea, unless he had intention to do this. And of course, when I had this issue presented in the council, the delegate said, from India said, well, how else do you really determine mens rea unless by looking at thoughts or what isn't about thought? The answer is no, right? The answer is intention is not just thoughts in a head. So the point I'm making is that, we've done very well with the Frank LaRue's cognitive liberation of us by saying that, rights offline apply online. We've done a lot of work in that. And in that journey, I want to spot two things. One is the recognition by the council and by treaty bodies that privacy restrictions are also subject to the tests of legality, proportionality, and necessity. That the test has been applied for that as well. And other recognitions such as privacy by design, that we all claim that there should be the requirements of human rights to apply from the full life cycle, from the conception, design, development, deployment, to use in evaluation. So the entire process as an obligation, as a responsibility for due diligence on human rights impact. And of course, we would hope that we can find language that will perhaps put us hope. We go for moratorium as reporters on technology that would be harmful to human rights. That can be a language we come to resolutions here. The other point I want to stress is the recognition that even publicly available information can be respected. In other words, a reconceptualization of privacy to understand that even publicly available information may engage the right to privacy and therefore it's not necessarily free for use. So a whole range of developments that are out there that can be marked as positive developments, but we need to go way beyond that. And the key challenge always is how to get companies to uphold their responsibility under the guiding principles on human rights, and how to make states take more serious action to address that. I will conclude here, but I want to flag one second of my most serious concerns of freedom of thought is the digital divide that the COVID made us all see. It goes across the world and within societies, but that is perhaps the foundational challenge we face to making sure everybody has access to the online space in the time to come, and even now. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ahmed, for giving us this outlook both on resolution language, on a moratorium, on the business responsibilities, and as you mentioned just now, of course, on the digital divide. So many topics to expand further in the discussion later on. But let me first move to our second speaker, Anna Beduski. So also to hear from you, again, you're working on disruptive technologies. We had the pleasure working together in a project around the BTech, so also bringing us to the business responsibility jointly with OHCHR. What progress and challenges do you currently see in your work on international human rights law online? And could you give some pointers to potential ways forward, actually, or to closing gaps that you might have identified? Please.
Well, thank you, Philip. I'll try my best to give you some pointers here. Thank you, everyone. So I think we all know that digital technologies, they are not new, right? And depending on how they are designed, developed, and deployed, they may bring some very potentially damaging aspects and impact profoundly the protection, the promotion, and the respect of human rights, and that both online and offline, right? As Professor Saeed has rightly pointed out, we have some positive aspects. For example, having access to information, which is nowadays more and more dependent on digital means and the internet, but also some negative aspects, such as using these digital platforms for fueling hate speech and exacerbate ethnic conflict, which can, at the end of the day, weaken our democracies. So you would ask me, where are we now with the protection and the respect of human rights online? In this regard, I agree with the Ambassador Marti that said that there are some progress here. There is some progress in this area, as it's true that the international community has come together and acknowledged that digital technologies, they have this impact on human rights. And we have seen many times the UN General Assembly, the Human Rights Council, acknowledging that the same rights that one has offline must also be protected online. However, there are many challenges that still persist. And let me here just highlight two of them that I think are quite important and that are key in this area. So first of all, there are harms that can be caused by new and emerging technologies that we do not yet fully understand. So to give you an example, we have AIs, artificial intelligence algorithms that might be biased and that can be increasingly deployed in the public, but also in the private sectors. We have issues, for example, with the protection of privacy in new and very much new and emerging platforms such as the metaverse and areas that we have not yet fully understood, but we're potentially having some very important privacy issues there. We also have in the more traditional type of social media uses, we have lots of questions and the impact that the uses of this more traditional social media have on the mental health of individuals, especially on children. So these are the set of harms that we do not yet fully understand. And secondly, I concur with your point on the fact that there is an issue with the responsibility of the technology companies. And this is a matter that is not yet settled. Even though we know that the UN Guiding Principles has introduced, so the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights has introduced this corporate responsibility to respect human rights, which is also applicable online. And we know that there is a lot of movement in this area, especially at EU level, in adopting new regulation in this field. We have, for example, the Digital Services Act that has actually very interestingly adopted officially today at the EU Council. We also know that there are proposals, for example, on the EU AI Act, the Directive on Liability, and all of these have been showing this progress. So you might think, or ask, what should be the way forward? And that's what Felix asked me to think about. Well, regulation and more robust regulation is indeed gaining a lot of traction. And I gave you some examples in the European Union, but there are other areas of the world where there is increasing scope for regulation. For example, in the United States, there are a number of AI regulation proposals that have been introduced at the federal level, so at the state level. Sorry, not the federal level, the federative state level. We saw policies adopted in China as well concerning the AI regulation, but also regulation of social media, and just to name a few. However, any regulation that relates to digital technologies or that relates to the conduct of technology companies should integrate international human rights law norms, rules, and principles to ensure that human rights are truly protected online. And to a certain extent, we have seen that in the European Union, perhaps due to the fact that the Charter of Fundamental Rights of the EU underpins a lot of their work. But there is still some room for improvement in these areas, which we could discuss later. So finally, I believe that, and I'll leave you with this thought, that regulation, whereas it's a good way forward, it's not the only way forward. There are other forms of engagement that could also contribute to the promotion and protection and respect of human rights online. To give you three pointers here, first, we could think about standardization, which I mean by that, setting technical standards that would take into account such human rights rules, norms, and principles, but also advocacy and raising awareness of these issues with broader stakeholder engagement, including end users of the technology and not just with technology companies and other stakeholders. And finally, we have been seeing that strategic litigation has also been increasingly yielding quite positive results in the field of digital rights and human rights in the digital sphere at both domestic and regional levels. So perhaps something to also keep in mind for the future. I'll stop here and I'll thank you for your attention and look forward to continuing the discussion.
Thank you so much. And I think, yes, those thoughts you leave us with, the advocacy, the strategic litigation, but in particular, the standardization, which actually maybe allows a technical approach to human rights by design, would be something I'd be love to explore more in the discussion. Thank you very much for that. But let us turn now to Khalid Ibrahim. Looking also from a regional perspective and into concrete cases, I think your NGO works very concretely on cases. What could you share about ongoing digital attacks? What's the development also? What do you see in trends, in particular, of course, in the MENA region, targeting human rights defenders? And what's the current, maybe also response internationally to that? So if I can turn to you, please.
Thank you, Felix. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to talk in this meeting about such an important topic. I will go quickly through my notes. I have 7 minutes. Human rights defenders and journalists in the MENA countries face an increasingly hostile environment for just exercising freedom of expression online. And a report called Who Will Be There? Persecution of Online Expression in the MENA region, which was released in November 2021 by GCHR and the International Human Rights Law Clinic at Berkeley School of Law. The report documents how oppressive governments in the region use anti-cybercrime and other laws, along with specialized law enforcement institutions, to criminalize online expression in violation of international law. States have enacted anti-cybercrime legislation that restricts and criminalizes protected online expression, including by extending the application of problematic penal restrictions existing in the other laws to online communications and assembly. In addition, government use criminal defamation and insult laws as well as vague and overbroad criminal prohibitions of expression that officials consider threatening to public order, national security, or other similar interests. Equipped with this broad legal arsenal, governments have arrested, prosecuted, and imposed stiff sentences, including the death penalty on defenders engaged in the legitimate and peaceful, valuable activity of promoting human rights through online expressions. In the name of national security or fighting terrorism, they are literally getting away with murder. And not only are their allies failing to do enough to stop them, they are allowing human rights defenders to sacrifice for economic and political interests. Now, far from these notes, NSO, for example, this company, they are saying we are supporting governments to fight terrorism. But believe me, this meeting for oppressive governments in our region is a terrorist act. And all of us are terrorists in the view of the oppressive governments. That is the mentality that we are facing in the MENA region. That is the kind of environment which is totally hostile almost that we're supposed to work in it. Back to the north. So some shocking recent cases from Saudi Arabia are very revealing. Really, it's very sad to tell you that on the 9th of August, 2022, the Saudi Specialized Criminal Court, it is the terrorism court, issued a 35 years prison sentence against this defender, human rights defender. Her name is Salma Al-Shahab. She's an academic, like many of you. She used to be in Leeds University, UK, and she was on visit to her family when she was arrested, just for some tweets that she posted online. And it's followed by 45-year sentence against another activist. Her name is Noura Al-Qahtani. They were convicted for their peaceful peaceful online activity under the anti-terrorism law and the anti-cyber crime law. These are the longest sentences ever issued against any peaceful activists in Saudi Arabia. There is a strong reason to believe that there are others who may suffer decades-long sentence as well. At the same time, governments in the MENA region are using digital surveillance tools to identify and surveil and silence dissidents, journalists, and human rights defenders, including women who face added threats. Saudi human rights defenders have been hacked and spied upon, along with others from the region, including Bahrain, Jordan, UAE. Some of them have been targeted by Pegasus spyware, including my close colleague, our board member, Ahmed Mansour, currently serving an unjust 10-year sentence in the UAE. Since his arrest on the 20th of March 2017, he is in solitary confinement until this moment, which is, as you know, regarded as torture. There are many others who were victims of Pegasus spyware, such as my colleague Ala Al-Sadiq. She passed away in UK due to a car accident, and my colleague Yahya Al-Asiri, who is the founder for Costa Human Rights. Anyway, back to the UN. In 2019, the UN Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Expression identified the need for an immediate moratorium on the global scale and a transfer of surveillance tool, rigorous human rights safeguard to put in place. That is his demands. Now, really, it is very slow moving, but we believe that we need this moratorium. In 2021, U.S. special procedures again called for a moratorium. However, there is no moratorium, and expert controls are not sufficient to stop the misuse of digital surveillance tools. While welcoming the EU Committee on Inquiry to investigate the use of Pegasus and other equivalent surveillance systems, we are calling on EU to hold accountable NSO group. That is very important. There are some remedies. DCHR proposed to campaign against the use of surveillance legislation and surveillance tools through a multi-pronged approach of collective civil society action, working with various partners and coalitions. We should get some success. DCHR and Access Now also co-founded the MENA coalition to combat surveillance with other regional and international NGOs. DSR also contributed to navigating the surveillance technology ecosystem, a human rights due diligence guide for investors. We have come up with innovation strategies. On behalf of DCHR, human rights lawyer William Borton in France filed a complaint in France against Israeli software company NSO. On behalf of all the defenders who were victims of Pegasus spyware, that is in July 2021. Finally, DCHR, Access Now, and MENA Coalition to Counter Surveillance, among other NGOs, require resources. Don't leave us alone in the field. We have to be able to consistently work together to fight the use of surveillance tools to target human rights defenders and other internet activists. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Khalid. Increasing hostile environment is one, but putting names and faces to the issues is really something that I think is very valuable also in our discussions that are sometimes far removed from where violations happen, but very important to really remind us of both the urgency and the gravity also of the crimes we're looking at the violations. Let me turn to our last speaker of the panel, Laura O'Brien, as I said, from Access Now. Access Now, well, you work on also spyware and surveillance technology, so you'll come to that, I imagine, but you also lead the important Keep It On initiative, fighting internet shutdowns. So if you could share some of the lessons learned from that, speak also, of course, if you may wish to, on the surveillance and spyware topic that was just so much highlighted by the previous speaker. And then finally, of course, I'd like to invite you to speak on the project that you're currently undertaking, which brings us back again to the focus of what can be done by our community, the mapping that you do of Human Rights Council and General Assembly resolution for active protection of human rights in the digital sphere. So over to you, Laura.
Great. Thank you so much, Felix. And thank you, Ambassador, and to the fellow panelists. And for everyone joining both online and in person, it's great to be here. So for my intervention, I do want to focus and dive into three main topics. The first being internet shutdowns, as Felix just captured, and then going into this discussion on surveillance and spyware, which I think the other panelists have really already dived into, and then going into, as Felix mentioned, the projects that we've been working on, a mapping exercise at the UN. So I think for my opening remarks and introduction, I want to segue into internet shutdowns and focus specifically on what the progress has been in that in terms of the multilateral level, elevating grassroots campaigns to the UN and what success we've seen then. I think then after that intervention, we can focus more on the other topics of surveillance and moving into the mapping tool. So shutdowns are increasing again worldwide, even after a short blip during COVID. In 2021, more governments shut down the internet than ever before. And we're seeing widespread restrictions, particularly across Iran right now, where masses are protesting gender inequity and repression. And this is really exposing that censorship is a key in the dictator's toolkit. And so many are swiftly turning to the international human rights framework to sharply warn and condemn Iran's actions, among others. Why is this? It's because the precedent is there. And that's really thanks to the ongoing efforts and the collective efforts by government, civil society, and the private sector. So looking back on this started on internet shutdowns with collective action spurred by civil society, which were elevating the grassroots initiatives to the global level. And at Access Now, as Felix mentioned, we run the Keep It On campaign and coalition, which is over 280 organizations across 105 countries. And really trying to bring that to the UN's attention, we have gained traction from UN special rapporteurs from the freedom of expression to peaceful assembly, who then dedicated entire statements and reports. There's even an addendum on internet shutdowns. This coupled by UN resolutions that we're seeing, from obvious ones, including the internet resolution, to less obvious resolutions, such as Switzerland and Costa Rica, who are leading the protest resolution, to even country-specific situations where we're condemning internet shutdowns in Iran and elsewhere. This really showcases how member states are in agreement on how shutdowns interfere with a range of human rights. And so we should therefore take stock of this collective achievements on shutdowns to date and use this as a guide to spur other action on other issues such as surveillance and the right to privacy, but also look more at the nuance and concrete action on shutdowns, because as the situation in Iran is clearly showing, there is no backing down on shutdowns when it comes to our adversaries. So the bottom line I want to take away for today is to use the former UN High Commissioner for Human Rights HRC 50 report, which was released back in June this year, on shutdowns, and use that as a springboard for further action. And on that report, I want to highlight two important takeaways from that I think we could all leverage quite well. The first is that report extends beyond civil and political rights and goes into the realm of economic, social, and cultural rights. And that addresses the inevitable overlap and intersection with other UN bodies and agencies who are working on development and technical standard setting. This past Friday, Doreen Bogdan, who is the Secretary General of the ITU, released a statement showcasing and telling governments to keep the internet on. So again, highlighting that internet shutdowns there. The second part of that report that I think we need to bring to fruition, I think Ambassador rightfully highlighted this as well in her opening remarks, is the need for a collaborative mechanism to work together, all of us as civil society and private sector and governments. And we're seeing this taking place right now. For some examples, on internet shutdowns, the Freedom Online Coalition has established a task force on internet shutdowns, which is led by the United States government, along with us at Access Now and the Global Network Initiative, has been coming together with various other governments to attack and civil society and private sector to tackle these very issues. Also, the US Summit for Democracy cohort, led by the UK and Estonia, are focusing specifically on internet shutdowns. So we're seeing this form of collective action on shutdowns, and I think we really need to use that as a springboard on other issues. But again, the issue on internet shutdowns is not done yet. I think elections monitoring is a key piece that is missing, and a prime example of how an internet shutdown trend that we need to hone in on. I think elections and shutdowns seem to go hand in hand, and we really need to tackle that. So my question, I guess, for all of you joining us here today is, what can the Human Rights Council advance on internet shutdowns during elections? And how can we capture this trend with the worrying economic, social, and cultural impacts of those who are most at risk, especially women and girls? I think, having more of a gendered and intersectional approach and analysis on this topic is also deeply missing. So I just want to pause there. I know I'm going to speak more on other components, but just to recap on internet shutdowns is a really good example of where we've seen a lot of progress. Now I think we need to segue into this element of surveillance and spyware, and also to peaceful assembly and association in the digital age. I'm hoping to talk on that too, but and then hopefully you can share the findings from the report. But over to you.
Actually, if you may want to share the findings of the report right now, I think before we open up the discussion, that would be definitely welcome. And then I think, surveillance popped up all throughout, so we'll come definitely to that discussion. So if you may.
Okay, great, thank you. So with many thanks to the support of the government of Switzerland, we conducted an extensive mapping exercise analyzing over 320 UN Human Rights Council and General Assembly Third Committee resolutions. And the point of this exercise was to identify the areas of progress as well as the critical gaps that we're seeing in both the international affirmation and the protection of human rights in the digital age. So it really nicely segues into this event too, and what we're trying to get out of that. So we are currently finalizing the mapping tool, which is currently this huge big chart on our computer screens and a lot to digest. But our UN consultant, Ryan Pan, who unfortunately could not be here today, has been working extensively hard on this project for the past 3 months. And I did want to share both 2 points: the initial reactions from what we're seeing looking at this tool, and then some preliminary findings, which we'll be able to showcase later as it's being finalized. So in terms of the initial reactions of the tool, we were able to, by highlighting key words and looking at what was in the resolutions and what is missing, we were really able to look back and get a better sense of how this is all shaped together at the global level. For instance, resolutions were reviewed backdate to 2008. And we were questioning why is this that we only got to 2008? It's because a lot of the resolutions were not available online until then. So even simple conclusions like that were affecting our advocacy. When we start to search for keywords in the tool and then linking it to the broader context, we're able to kind of put together some pieces. So for instance, digital literacy, that's a common term that's used today, but when did we first see this term arise? We can use this tool, go back and find which resolution was the first to talk about this. Disinformation, can we link it to the context of COVID-19? Yes, most certainly. We saw a rise in the references to disinformation from COVID-19, but we can also date it back to some other aspects as well. And my colleague wanted me also to highlight the Special Rapporteur Khan's new report, which declares the right to information as a survival right on which people's lives, health, and safety depend on. So definitely want to check out that. Private sector, that key term, when did that first arise in this context? A lot of us have been speaking today on the role of the private sector. I think it's really important to peg point where they first came in, maybe arising from the UN guiding principles. And we can also note through this mapping of actors which governments are leading on resolutions, which civil society are reporting. It really helps us get a better sense of who our partners are and where we can leverage and go forward on this. So it allows us to have a bigger picture of what's happening on the international stage. And so for some preliminary findings, while the language on digital rights has often been limited to a range of categories, largely broad for the most part, of the history of UN resolutions, a trend has been emerging in at least the past 5 years. That's what we're noticing based on this tool. And the texts related to protecting human rights in the digital age during this period have tended to reflect a richer knowledge about tech business operations, identifying specific new technologies and their nuanced human rights impact. Digital rights references remain uneven and inconsistent regarding the overall number of themes that appear in the resolutions. And I think I just want to pick up the one point that was mentioned, I believe, by Dr. Shahid on, what can we do with the resolutions, like bringing them up to date. I think that's a key part and element of this mapping exercise. So it really shows what civil society can contribute to this discussion. There's a lot of expertise to tap into, and we're investing in the Human Rights Council, want to see it strengthened and more relevant, and to share our findings more widely so that all of you here today can use this tool in your advocacy, in your research, and share it with your delegations. So we thank Switzerland to their support, and we look forward to publishing our findings.
Thank you very much. And with this, you answer a follow-up question of mine, which is the publishing of those findings and also the mapping tool itself, because mapping so many resolutions, I see that you take technology as a help to do that, but also then whether that tool would be also available for others to use, because I'm just thinking of a project we're having on the data revolution and on digital tracking of human rights recommendations that come out of the system. And I think there's so many links to be made and actually really interactions to be seen. So very much looking forward to this. But now let me open the debate to all of you for your comments and questions here in the room. And as I mentioned, via the chat online. I would have also myself a number of follow-up questions, but really want to give at this moment the opportunity to all of you to interact. So with this, I don't know if we have already, turning to my colleague, we already do have questions from online, one here, okay. But maybe also first in the room, please. Yes, please. And if you don't mind, please do introduce yourself briefly.
Sure. Sachin Matera, Head of Research and Policy at Fondation Mandela, Swiss-based NGO supporting media in conflict and post-conflict environments. Thank you very much for this excellent panel. I wanted to flag a report that was recently published by 3 Swiss organizations entitled Digital Spaces and Peace. We published this report together with ITT for Peace Foundation and Principle for Peace International that I have the pleasure to present today. And we also to push the Switzerland to save the opportunity of its candidacy to the Security Council to try to move the needle on this important issue. So we're happy to see this event happening with the Swiss sponsor. I was also really happy to hear you talking about the importance of considering not the digital spaces in isolation, but also together with offline spaces. I think it's very important in order to respect the principle of leaving no one behind and the digital gap that we need to keep in mind. Another also issue I think you mentioned that I just want to add a complementary thought on that is the importance to fill the normative gap around positive obligation of state to promote the right to information, including in its horizontal effects vis-a-vis non-state actors. And here, I would like to highlight a specific aspect that is the capture by those big techs of digital advertisement revenues that really kills the business model of news media. And here to also flag reports published last year called New Deal for Journalism, where a distinguished set of experts on journalism viability highlighted a concrete recommendation. One of them is to devote 0.1% of GDP over the next 10 years to help the transition of the news media to the digital era, and other concrete recommendation when it comes to taxing, to advertising, helping the news media sector to bargain with big tech, and also working on licensing rights. So those are very important recommendations that you can find in those reports. Another non-state actors that we don't talk about much, but that has a lot of impact, are UN peacekeeping operations and what they do or do not do when it comes to media support in very fragile media environments. We find concrete example of that in DRC Congo, South Sudan, Central African Republic, Mali, and so on. And noticeably, they are not mentioned, the UN peace operation, among the set of actors that have responsibility within the UN system when it comes to safety of journalism. And I think we'll start here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for those important comments, and actually also reminding us that, well, the peace and the human rights pillar really need to look more at each other. And so thank you very much for bringing also that report to our attention. I'll take 2-3 more questions before I turn back to the panel. So again, everybody invited. We do have a question. Yes, so Domenico, please, if you can read out the question that we received online.
Thank you, everybody, and thank you to all panelists for the most interesting discussion. I have a question myself.
Of course, as well.
We can go to the online one. So the question comes from the interesting presentation on the fundamental, on the mapping exercise on the language of digital rights and this fundamental exercise that you're doing. And I was thinking, we're talking about digital rights, and digital rights is something that is not new. And what about new technologies? What happened in the history so that the term new technology came about, and what are the characteristics, and if there is a change in terms of resolution languages there? So that was from me, and from our online participant, let me read it. So indeed, tech companies have a central role in protecting human rights online. And one of them is through the integration of human rights standards in content moderation policies. However, another issue is to stand up against authoritative regimes that wish to use social media to restrict human rights. So the question is, what tools do social media companies have to respond to government requests that do not comply with human rights? And of course, I invite our online participants to pose up questions through the Q&A function.
Thank you very much. And also, I'm piggybacking on your first question on new technologies. I think also it's interesting when in the discussion on the UN guiding principles, there's that talk about tech companies, and then realizing that actually by now, more or less every company is a tech company. So also maybe some thoughts on that. But again, inviting further comments or questions. Yes, please.
Hey everyone, I'm Rachel Miller. I'm studying International Law at the Graduate Institute, and I'm originally from Canada. For the last 4 summers, I've actually worked with our federal foreign affairs department called Global Affairs Canada. And this summer, I actually did a lot of work on our participation in the Freedom Online Coalition, as Canada is chairing it this year, and as well on the Media Freedom Coalition. And so my question to the panelists, and kind of the issues that we've been talking about and the concerns raised, is in terms of these coalition of states, one of the criticisms of them is, one, there's not a lot of participation from developing or eastern or southern states. They're largely Western or Eurocentric, as well as their membership is limited. So I believe the Freedom Online Coalition is less than 40, and the Medium Freedom Coalition is less than 60. So obviously limited in scope. But in these coalitions, there is work being done. Like Canada's in the middle of drafting this new Ottawa agenda in terms of looking at a lot of the concerns that we've been talking about after engagement with civil society and their various missions. So I'm just wondering, in terms of your perspectives on these groups of states that get together to try to tackle these issues, but considering these criticisms and potentially limitations that they have, and maybe is it better for these states to be kind of putting their efforts and their energy elsewhere? And if so, where would that be, and what would that look like?
Okay, that's big questions actually, but thank you so much for that input. There was a request. Yes, over here, please.
Yes. Hello, my name is Pawa Kiratna. I'm from Sri Lanka. I'm a student at the Graduate Institute studying international law. My question is for Mr. Shahi. Just a very specific one. In your work, did you come across any insights as to the diminishing agency of people as they interact with the internet? Because I think we touched on elections and disinformation, but I also feel like how we interact as citizens of the democracy, the internet plays a major role. I just want to know whether you found any insights in your work with that, or anyone else in your work.
Thank you so much. So I'll give it back to the panel now, to all of you actually, because most of the questions were addressed to all of you, but one directly to you, Ahmed. If you would like to start, I'll give the floor first to you.
Thank you. Yeah, very good question. The answer is yes, but I'm sorry how to really shape this. Say, simple case of saying encryption that we rely on for safe communications, right? We presume that using Signal, other platforms will give us a safe space to communicate, and therefore want to be involved in mobilizing people, really alliance dependence, and so forth. That's how I would see my life as being, right? If I'm told that, hey, Pegasus is now going to compromise my encryption, and therefore, what people don't want to know about me, know about my activity. What do I do? I suddenly withdraw, stop this work, and then I become the sellers, right? That's one way of, one could say, my self-determination has been affected by this. Ambassador Martis at the beginning, the whole vision is to sort of address or increase digital self-determination, right? So we talk about the reverse of that. How the more we go online, the more we leave the footprints, the more states can read that, the less we become able to really be ourselves. And the biggest impact here is chilling effects, because we know that it's going to be there. But then there are also many cases of people being tracked down for the work they've done, just pulled from house because they've been at a demonstration recently. Sri Lanka right now is doing this, right? I mean, there was this protest earlier, which seemed to be, well, there were good peaceful protests, but then suddenly British got what they wanted, a new prime minister, perhaps not entirely new, but a prime minister that he sort of started in the old guard. Now they're putting everybody who was at this place, only spotted through these digital means, right? So we see an example of how this has been applied to undermine that. But even otherwise, the Child Rights Committee, the General Comment 25, identify how children are being affected by the online world. In other words, how they're being manipulated. Entire disinformation work is through that, right? How we are being fed bad information, disinformation to manipulate ourselves. And there are other ways of, falsely undermining our thought processes. All of that we are introduced by we're online often, or digital tools, right? We can be in echo chambers, information bubbles, or get directed in certain spaces, or because we no longer control ourselves. In the old, say, analog world, I will decide whether I read Sunday paper, which papers I can buy, right? Now I get, I've been looking at my daughter being ill, and I've just been told where to find hospitals in Switzerland, right? So I am being directed by forces that I don't know about, in ways I call this all undermining my agency. So my biggest concern about going online is that it undermines my autonomy, my agency, and the privacy protection is the gatekeeper of keeping that safe for me. And when that is gone, then we just lose that. So my freedom of thought report is all about how we are losing our ability to be ourselves, and someone is taking over. That's something, that question.
Thank you. Well, you can of course address the other questions too, but if you want to give you a break, maybe you turn to Anna first. Anna, again, all the questions that you might want to take up, but in particular, I was thinking also maybe the ones on the business responsibility might also be something you could potentially address.
Okay. Yeah. Well, thank you. They're great questions and a lot to unpack. On the technology companies, I think it is an important point to work together with the companies, and I think this polarization of putting one versus the others, putting civil society against technology companies, will not lead us to any decent or good agreement in this field. So it's true that we need regulation, and that would be also interesting for the companies to know exactly, to have it laid down, what are the expectations that governments have on them, and what is the leeway that they have to act. So then they can exercise their own powers within this responsible corporate environment. I would pick up on the second question about the engagement with non-Western countries in discussions, which I think it's a very important point. So coming myself from a country that is a non-Western, I'm originally from Brazil. So I see, for example, that in Brazil, we have a lot of civil society working on issues of digital rights, and to a certain extent successfully or not. But the question is that we're having more engagement, and I think it's important to bring these perspectives to the table, because the issues that we have in Western or to use the more controversial term, like global North countries, can be different from those that we would have in global South countries. And I really see that on a daily basis in tracking with colleagues and family in Brazil, and how they use technology, which can be different. And so I think it is important to have this broader engagement with not just states and representatives of state and technology companies, but also the end users that are from different communities, so that we understand what are the needs, what are the gaps, and how to address those. So yeah, thank you for posing the question.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And maybe in another round, if you can also come back to the standardization question of technical human rights by design, whether there's actually just wishful thinking or already some steps undertaken. But first, let me turn to Mr. Ibrahim, please.
Yeah. Thank you, Felix. Sasha mentioned the digital era. And really, this is very risky for us. The traditional media is owned by oppressive governments, and on occasions by the intelligence themselves. Like in Oman last year, they issued a decree for the internal security service to own the internet and to do whatever they need for the surveillance equipment and to monitor all the networks. So this is very risky. If the digitalization of the media outlet, if it means that we will have only the government controlling the internet, that is very much against all what we promote, freedom of expression over the internet and beyond. So we have a risk there taken into account. Many independent voices were closed in Oman, Al-Zaman newspaper, in Bahrain, Al-Wasat. So we have some concerns about the digitalization of the media outlets, which could mean that the oppressive government will take control over the media. But when we talk about social media networks, we have a problem also. In general, tech companies, they apply the highest standards when they are in US and UK, in their homelands. And when they come to our countries, they will have strong ties with oppressive governments, ignoring civil society organizations. And we worked hard to change that. Now, the GCHR is on the Safety and Trust Council of Twitter. Some of my colleagues on the Council of Facebook, we are trying to change this really kind of unfair interference by oppressive governments to impose their restrictions on the freedom of expression over the net. And when we talk about the states and cooperation between the North and the South, I have to tell you something, that the unconditional support given by US and UK to oppressive governments in our region, probably the main reason why we have seen this deterioration of human rights in our countries. So this is a problematic issue for us. This link between Western states and oppressive states. How we tackle that, there are a lot of solutions, mainly visibility and support to human rights defenders. Human rights movement, they are trying their best to have a peaceful change. Defenders are the champions of change in our countries, and we are getting very little support from some governments, including the US and UK. For example, I will give you this example. We and others, such as Human Rights Watch, we try our best to organize a meeting between defenders who are working in exile to meet President Biden before his visit to Saudi Arabia, which happened on the 15th of July. And we agreed with the American administration for this meeting to take place and to have a human rights declaration before the visit of President Biden. In the last minute, they canceled this meeting and they canceled the human rights declaration. President Biden went to Saudi Arabia. He got nothing, but we paid the price. I just read all these sentences, heavy sentences. They were after the visit. So always we are paying a heavy cost because of this cooperation between Western states and our oppressive governments. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Laura, also for you, lots of questions, including on the tool, actually, and of course also on the energy spent by countries on coalitions like the Freedom Online Coalition. Is that a good way to go? Where to go further? What to do instead? So if you want to comment on those.
Yeah, thank you. I'm happy to answer both of those questions. So turning to the first one, thank you for that on the mapping tool, looking at new and emerging technologies. So of course, there is the resolution that was put forward at the Human Rights Council on that specific topic. And on that point, I really want to point out the technical standards report that has come out of that resolution is a huge positive. I think if technologies and other agencies are able to collaborate with human rights experts on that, kind of segueing that to what can we do when it comes to spyware and surveillance. I think that is a nice springboard that could be used from that resolution into other resolutions as well. And yeah, in looking at our tool, when we're looking specifically at new and emerging technologies, it was really important for us to make sure, because that's such a broad category, to capture various different ones in the tool so that it's easier to control F and search for it. So definitely a key piece in terms of the methodology when it comes to the tool that we'll definitely need to be taking forward. On the second question from my fellow Canadian on Freedom Online Coalition, and I think the other panelists have spoke eloquently to the gaps between global North and the global majority. I think when it comes to the Freedom Online Coalition, I do note that they, and I should admit that at Access Now, we're on the advisory network. But in terms of acknowledging in light of the lack of the global majority states being involved in the coalition, there have been some initiatives that are taking place. For instance, it was established a digital quality task force within the FOC, of course, to look at the composition of the FOC to make sure that there's more diversity, of course, in terms of the member state composition, but also within the advisory network as well. So that is a key pillar that is trying to influence the rest of the Freedom Online Coalition. I know that in terms of elevating this from what's being done within the coalition to broader efforts, I think the FOC does a good job of issuing joint statements on particular issues. There's been several, including one on internet shutdowns and back in 2017. But bringing these statements up into implementation is something that we're slowly seeing more traction on, including doing more so at the multilateral level ahead of the Human Rights Council and ahead of the GA. So I think there's a lot more discussions on how to bring that up. And hopefully by doing that, that might get some more other governments involved and interested in to build that coalition going forward. So I think those are some 2 points on that.
Thank you very much. And we have about 15 minutes left before the end of the event. So I'd like to encourage you again to bring any questions or comments now. We'll have one last round before we come to the closing remarks by all of you. So yes, Remy, please.
Yes, thank you. My name is Remy Friedman of the Historical Department of Foreign Affairs. I have a question related to companies. One of the foundational papers of the big tech partners is on its business models. We know that a number of tech companies, and we can see tech companies which large, hire the number of human rights experts, managers, trying to put into place due diligence procedures, etc. But how far are these companies, in your opinion, ready to change their business model? Because sometimes what we leave are negative impacts actually closely linked to the business model. So are they ready to do what Philip Morris is doing?
Could I add?
Okay, so I see that you have an urge to reply. So instead of taking more questions, I'll let you get back to that, but also the others, please, to comment on that. Yes, Khalid.
Well, I think it is very slow moving. If you are talking about businesses and human rights, believe me, there are thousands of companies working in our country. They have strong ties with oppressive governments. And out of all these companies, only we are working in this field now 12 years. Only one company approached us recently, and they told us we want to have a human rights focus in our work in in your region, and that is Ericsson. And I have some meetings with them recently. The other companies are just working with governments. In Iraq, for example, hundreds of protesters, peaceful protesters, were killed in their life. And we wanted just a statement, small statement from the companies that are working in the petroleum section. They refused. They never listened to us. That is, I am talking about the popular protest in Iraq that started on the 1st of October 2019. So all these years, many people were killed in Iraq. That's just one example, one country. They refused to show any visibility, any solidarity, any support to their families of victims. So it is just so sad to talk about the companies that are working in our countries. They have the highest standards, as I said, of human rights in their home countries, and when they come to our countries, they fully ignore human rights.
Thank you. But of course, that's also the business sector at large. And I think also the question aims also at the business model in the, say, online. Well, again, I use the word digital companies, but I think we talk about the platforms and others. Anna, maybe would you have some insight on that also?
Yeah, I can give you some pointers on that. So it's true that many companies are voluntarily putting themselves forward, and they hire a number of people that understand human rights. There is a lot of the ethical framework that gets mixed up with the human rights framework in this field as well, which sometimes is not very much ideal. But we also know that, for example, on due diligence in Germany, before the adoption of the domestic legislation on mandatory due diligence, the state had done some research to find out if voluntarily companies in general would be willing to make these changes and comply with the requirements. And the answer was like very low. The percentage of changes were very low comparatively with if these companies were mandated to do so. So that's this very complex balancing exercise that governments need to think about on how much we need to mandate. So we need to have regulations and legislation in place to mandate these companies to change perhaps their own business models and comply with the rules. But how much of that would actually make innovation not progress, right? So it would stiffen the innovation, because companies, they need to also be free to do so. So it's this kind of very interesting balancing act between imposing regulation, but also allowing companies to exercise their own free will, if I mean. But we see that more often they would be more keen to comply if they have this set of rules that mandate that compliance. And that's what we're seeing with mandatory due diligence in many aspects, and also in relation to tech companies.
Okay, thank you very much. There was further questions also. Yes, please, me again within the room. Yes, so first, Stefania, please.
Hi, yes, so I'll try to be quick. My name is Stefania. I'm a PhD candidate at the Institute, and I'm working on human repression and social media platforms as part of my doctoral research. I have two questions. One is for Laura. So you mentioned earlier that through your tool, you could also see at which point the private sector makes its appearance in resolutions and UN documents. So I mean, in my personal readings of all these documents, I see that also the terms through which the private sector is addressed have changed through time. So you have private sector, you have social media companies, technology companies, intermediaries, and so on and so forth. So I'm wondering whether it is evident through the way in which the language has changed, whether the records are also addressing different actors in a way, because I see a sort of tendency to go from the largest group, and now in the recent reports we have seen attention to social media platforms specifically. So how does this change in the language affect the way in which human rights interact with these companies, and if there is any truth in differentiating between these actors. And then the other question is more general about human rights standards for content moderation. So to which standards should companies make reference to when trying to apply international human rights law in their own content moderation policies? Should they refer to the guidance specifically created for states? We also see that in some reports there are guidelines from social procedures. There are guidelines given to social media companies specifically. So should there be need to be a move towards having more tailored guidance to social media platforms through UN documents or not?
Thank you very much, and I'll take your questions also, please.
Thank you very much, Alexandra Scheller from the Assistant Department of Foreign Affairs and the International Law Directorate. Thank you so much to all the panelists for your extremely interesting and valuable inputs. I think all of us can take out so much from today, so thank you for that. Actually, my questions are quite similar to the ones that you just focused on. I would like to hear from Laura, if possible, a bit more about the mapping exercise in the sense that there were maybe also some surprises where you saw, wow, there is so much more progress or less progress than expected. And also if you can differentiate between specific human rights or specific applications or forms of new technology where you can tell that there's maybe more agreement already between states to bring that into resolutions and push it forward. And topics that you can tell from the mapping exercise are really hard to include, that maybe only big ones were tried and disappeared again. I know this is a really broad question, but share maybe some insights on that would be great. And then the other question is mostly to Anna about the standardization. If you could just expand a little bit more on what you think, what aspects of human rights are maybe a must to really be there. And at this stage, you're obviously interested to also hear your recommendations on what to do, what is needed to advance notably in this aspect. And yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And we'll come back now to the panel for the last 7 minutes that you have. So divide it nicely, please. But Laura, if I can start with you, so I go in reverse order of the panel before. So starting with you, just as long as also that question is fresh and also quite detailed in terms of the output. And of course, any other points that you'd like to make in closing, as this is our last round.
Yeah, thank you, Felix. I think I'll go into the questions and then comment a little bit more on surveillance and spyware, since I wasn't able to get to that. So the mapping tool, of course, thank you very much, Alexandra and Stefania, for these questions. I think this is something I'll definitely have to go back to the tool and kind of research into to get a better sense. As I mentioned, my colleague Ryan is the one who is mainly extensively working on this, but I do think it's important to note these different terms. Again, as you've said, like social media is captured, but also the private sector. So really ensuring that we're capturing those key terms throughout the tool will be essential in order to get a better global picture and understanding of that. When it comes to areas of progress and some surprises that have come out, I think, getting back to, where we are seeing, gender language, I think, was something that was pretty big. And the safety of journalists, I think those resolutions have been huge on making gendered connections. I think there's also, it's been difficult to see, when some resolutions would take a specific narrowed an approach and kind of divert a little bit further away from their original meaning and how that changed. So we'll definitely take in mind when we do the finalizing our report and our findings to look more into these specific questions so that we can get a better sense in terms of reporting back to you on that. In terms of just concluding, I wanted to mention on a point on peaceful assembly and association in the digital age. So Access Now, we were founded during Iran's Green Movement, and noting that it really has been an essential component of our advocacy is look to freedom of association and assembly as this gateway right. It onboards us to other rights. For example, in Iran, we're seeing women and girls leadership in the movement, advance protest and gender equality in some ways similar to Sudan's recent movement, and youth organized massive protests in Thailand in 2020 and 2021. So it's really evident that technology can be a tool to facilitate and enable and coordinate these protests, which is really amplified during the COVID-19 pandemic, as physical restrictions led many to exercise their rights online. And such restrictions in Iran, including on VPNs, are really showcased to show how it's a means to quash dissent. So if we're not careful, we not only risk losing our enjoyment of that right in doing so, but our future society will ultimately pay the price for the other rights that stem from this essential right. So the freedom of association and assembly is an important lens for our future. It shows the intersection with a range of other rights, but other issues as well, such as climate change and rising authoritarianism. So I think another takeaway from this is we must protect its digital migration. And I really, again, want to commend Switzerland and Costa Rica for their efforts to advance the normative development through the protest resolution, and also the work of the mandate of the UN Special Rapporteur on freedom of association and assembly for his contributions, particularly noting the shrinking civic space for civil society that's happening worldwide. And then finally, on that point, I do want to call attention to the upcoming COP27 protests and Free Allah, as well as the IGF 2022 in Ethiopia as sites for potential reprisal against the exercise of freedom of association online and off. These are UN events that we need to ensure that civil society and everyone involved has active access and attention to fully engage in these important venues. On a final note, or do I have time, or kind of wrapping up? Yes. Okay, I'll just wrap up on that point. But my three main takeaways, I guess, for today was to showcase how internet shutdowns has been a good example of what we've done from the grassroots to the global. I think the panelists have really done an excellent job showcasing not only the role of the private sector, so I really appreciate the comments on that, but also bringing to light the actual cases and the stories in terms of surveillance and technology. And then again, moving forward on looking at freedom of association and assembly as this gateway right. And we look forward to sharing the mapping tool with you all for your engagement, and of course, taking away the questions you brought on that tool for further discussion.
Thank you very much. Ali, please.
Well, I don't have that much, but just to say that if you are not optimistic, if you don't have hope, don't work in the field of human rights and demeanor. All problems, all bad news, torture, killings, but you have to keep the hope. So I am telling you, although the environment is very hostile, as Ambassador Natalie said, we have some progress. Always we have progress, despite all the bad news. So we will continue our work, and we have a strong belief that the change is coming. No doubt we have difficulties, but we are going to face them, to overcome them, and to have that prosperous future for every single citizen.
Thank you. Thank you for prevailing optimism on that and your outlook to the future. Anna, also briefly, please, to the question.
Well, just a very quick point on standards, standardization on human rights. Thank you for the question. I think there is a lot of progress already in the field. It's something that standard setting organizations have been working on. For example, on AI, on artificial intelligence. So we have IEEE that has been doing a lot of work on that. ISO, the standard setting organization as well. However, often we have the ethics debate that comes into play, and not the human rights norms, rules that come into play. But there are ways of, in my view, very positive view of dealing with that. If we have a broader conversation with standard setting organizations, and if they acquire, and also specifically technologists, if they acquire this understanding of what we're talking about when we're talking about human rights. So to give you a very simple example, we talk a lot about bias in AI systems, right? So apart from the very entrenched historical biases that would be very hard to deal with, there are some types of bias, for example, representation bias in data sets. So if you're designing a tool, an artificial intelligence algorithm, very simple, and you have a data set that is not representative of the diversity of the population that then this tool is going to be applied to, well, there is an issue there, right? If there is not a gender representation, ethnic representation involved, So that would be more difficult for that tool at the end of the day to do its job. So technical standards could be used there just to, it's a recipe for the designers to say like, look, these are the grounds for discrimination that perhaps you need to be aware of, because this tool, once deployed, if there are problems with the diversity on gender, on race, on ethnicity, there might be at the end of the day, once, for example, states will deploy that for identification of individuals at the borders, for example, there might be questions of discrimination of certain categories. So let's start at the very beginning and have these technical solutions that could integrate this type of human rights approaches. So, but we need to speak the same language, and often we don't with the technologists and the human rights specialists.
Thank you. And human rights specialists also, well, they might speak the same language, but they sometimes look at silos. So also many rapporteurs have focused on impact of technology, of digitalization on their mandates. But is there maybe something as a takeaway point, Ahmed, what special procedures as a whole could do, what the council could request them to do to get a more holistic view?
Right. Thank you very much. I think, the nature of the working methods of special rapport doesn't necessarily condemn them to work in silos because they're independent of others, of the UN, of everybody. So they generally work on their own. Also, because they only have 10,000 words to dive into the issue, they can't share 5,000 words with a colleague and get nowhere for either of them, right? So that is even less if they share with more people. The solution would be, I think, really for us to call and have the Swiss government with the idea on the annual conference of federal rapporteurs to devote a day on this, and then all of the entire conference come up with something. There are precedents for this. On Guantanamo Bay, there was an annual conference statement. So if the annual conference, all the rapporteurs get together and look at issuing a statement of the conference, then you have one. Or you mandate, the council mandates the rapporteurs, whatever, X number, to look at the issue holistically, then they can bring that. Without that mandate coming from the council, they can't do it. And without the annual conference being engaged on it, the whole system can't respond.
Thank you very much. So I think there's things to take away, definitely, also very practical steps. I also invite you all to join us on 18th of October to the annual conference of the Geneva Human Rights Platform that will look into digital connectivity, and will discuss, among others, also with a member of the Facebook Oversight Board on all those issues. So really invite you to continue the discussion with us. I'd like to thank you all for your participation here and online, and in particular, I think thank the co-organizers, Costa Rica, Access Now, and Switzerland for the support to this event and for the continued cooperation that we have around those topics. Thank you very much. I think it was a very interesting discussion. As I mentioned, this discussion was recorded. It will be also available online for further viewing, and I'm looking very much forward to discussing further with all of you. You're also part of our annual conference, actually, with Access Now, so really continuing those discussions to see how we can make practical steps like the one you just mentioned to go forward. Thank you very much, and this event is now closed. Thank you.